This is the story of a wall, the Berlin Wall. It's the story of its construction, of the methods a dictatorship used to keep its citizens trapped inside a kind of prison. It's a story of escape, of ingenuity, courage, and daring, of what people will do in the pursuit of freedom. And it's the story of a profound symbol, the Western gateway to the Cold War. Thousands tried to get over, under, through, or around it, attempting to foil the ever-escalating and perilous wall technology. More than 1,000 died trying.
That's okay?
Mr. Gorbachev,
tear down this wall.
It lasted 28 years, and it came down as suddenly as it went up. (1945). By the end of World War II, more than 55 million people have died, and Europe lay in ruins. Russia's Red Army takes Berlin at a cost of 200,000 of its soldiers. Stalin wants to keep the capital of defeated Germany as a spoil of war. But as the ruins are cleared, brick by brick, the Russians have to share Berlin with the Western Allies. This will turn out to be a recipe for disaster. The German capital and country will be jointly administered by the 4 victorious allies in 4 separate zones. In the west, France, Britain, and the US. In the east, the Soviet Union. And in the middle of the Soviet zone, Berlin is divided again.
Stalin had referred to West Berlin as a thorn in the flesh of the Russian occupation of Eastern Germany. Khrushchev publicly declared it to be a malignant tumor. I mean, these images of kind of a disease in the body politic of the Eastern Bloc called West Berlin were used by Soviet leaders frequently.
In 1948, Stalin blocks land routes to West Berlin to force the Western Allies out. The American and British airlift supplies West Berlin for 9 months until Stalin gives in. And from 1949, there are 2 German states.
Very rapidly, both Germany, but especially Berlin, became points of confrontation. And Berlin then served this purpose for 40 years as a point of confrontation, not just between 2 ideological systems, but between 2 centers of power who were vying for control of Europe.
East Germany, the GDR, with West Berlin stuck in the middle. The only border still open is in Berlin. Between 1949 and 1960, up to 3 million Germans leave the communist East, heading west, via West Berlin. The East German population is shrinking, dangerously.
In
1960, 200,000 fled. By June 1961, another 160,000 had gone. It was draining the country's lifeblood. East Germany's weak economy desperately needed its workforce. The communists were afraid the economy would collapse. It was becoming increasingly urgent to do something that would solve the problem of West Berlin.
It's still easy to cross between sectors in Berlin, just by showing identity papers. East Germany's communist leader, Walter Ulbricht, badly needs a permanent solution.
Ulbricht was a very determined man, and he saw this as his point to start pushing the idea of a barrier, a fence, a wall, call it what you will, again. And he did. And so as we move into 1960-61, he's there constantly on his trips to Moscow, constantly on the phone, saying, this is what we need to do. This is the only way we're going to solve this problem.
Ulbricht needs and gets from Moscow, the center of Soviet power, permission to build a barrier. But when asked about his intentions at a June 15th press conference, he lies.
There are people in West Germany who want us to mobilize the construction workers of the GDR to construct a wall. Is that right? No one has any intention of building a wall.
In Moscow, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev sees a chance to neutralize the Allies in Berlin or even remove them.
Khrushchev said that having Berlin was like being able to squeeze the testicles of the West whenever he felt like it. Whenever he wanted to cause pain to the West, he just squeezed Berlin. He made difficulties for them.
And there is a bonus opportunity. Khrushchev can test the resolve of the new young US President, John F. Kennedy.
Kennedy said, "Don't touch West Berlin." And the assumption that Khrushchev, and indeed Ulbricht, his East German colleague, can make from that is, as long as we don't actually infringe on Allied rights in West Berlin at this point, the Allies will do nothing. And they were absolutely right.
At the beginning of August 1961, West Berlin is preoccupied with hosting its International Film Festival, totally unaware of the impending disaster.
It all come to a highlight on the 13th of August, in the middle of the night, when we got the call, that something's going on.
Harold Smith is a US tank commander in West Berlin. He's sent to take a look and maybe do more.
They repairing the roads? What are they doing with all of this material? And then we went down there, of course. We had a countdown going, and all of those tanks along the wall were going to just go crush that wall down. But 1 minute before we were to do it, the phone rang, and it was President Kennedy. And he told his State Department representative, "Don't touch the wall."
All the Allies can do is watch. One of the soldiers on the eastern side is Wolfgang Engels.
We were deployed in Berlin on the 13th of August, early in the morning. We were brought to Berlin by truck. As a pioneer battalion, it was our job to set up the obstacles to seal off the streets.
77 east-west crossings are sealed inside the city.
The barbed wire started going up on August the 13th. It was very carefully kept exactly inside East Berlin. There were never any kind of incursion into West Berlin.
On this day, East Germany seals West Berlin from the outside world. It would be cut off for the next 28 years.
Hardly any of the soldiers involved on our side believed the border could be totally sealed off.
Soon, a 97-mile makeshift wall encircles West Berlin and its more than 2 million citizens.
Looking back, I'm very happy there was no violence and no shooting.
The Western Allies let it happen.
Kennedy clearly made a decision that they would protest, they would object, but not go to war.
Within weeks, a more elaborate border structure snakes its way through Berlin, making escape nearly impossible. Watchtowers, a 6-foot-high wall topped with barbed wire, concrete obstacles to block vehicles, a rear fence, and between them, a border strip, a cleared area for shooting. And then, the propaganda war begins.
Fellow Germans in the uniform of the Volkspolizei, you stand here day and night at Ulbricht's barriers. You're not stupid. You realized long ago that Ulbricht's measures are endangering world peace.
Thousands of friends and families are torn apart. Berliners are in despair. But the United States is less concerned.
Kennedy was not unhappy that the wall was built. I mean, it diffused the crisis. He said, we saved West Berlin. And so the optic that they had was not that the two parts of Berlin had been separated, but that we had stood firm. We had avoided the ultimate consequences.
On August 15th, 1961, Konrad Schumann seizes his chance. He's the first border policeman to escape to West Berlin. Film of his leap to freedom circles the world. He's one of many risking their lives to escape. East Germany moves to seal off parks, bridges, houses, roofs, and sewers.
NCOs and soldiers went down into the sewers to install barriers, and the first platoon that went down there just disappeared.
For Berliners, it's a terrible shock. Roswitha Brosius, even at the tender age of 16, is engaged to Klaus Köppen from West Berlin. For weeks, he's been urging her to come over. Now, it's too late.
He always knew what he wanted. He wanted me right from the start, and he had to have his way. He just said, come on over. I could so easily have gone across on one or two occasions.
The border fortifications are already getting more formidable. People can only see each other from a distance.
I just didn't want to, or only if my parents could come too, the whole family. That's what we said, everyone goes or no one goes.
It was disappointing, but no one knew how it was going to turn out, what was coming. No one reckoned that the border was going to get so massive.
But Klaus is already devising a plan to get Roswitha out. He's just waiting for the right moment. It won't be easy. Checkpoint Charlie. Today it's a tourist attraction. But once it was the most famous and busiest border crossing in Berlin. The epicenter of the Cold War. The Western Allies have to make sure it stays open, but the East Germans are making it difficult for them to cross.
In October 1961, we were still fighting over the access, and an American diplomat was blocked from going into East Berlin, and it escalated.
For the Americans, it's a matter of principle. They refuse to recognize East Germany as a state.
They didn't want armed representatives of our state to check their passes, because they don't have diplomatic relations with our state.
According to the four power agreements, the Allies have the right to cross over the border whenever they want to.
They pushed their way through, went into East Berlin for a short drive, and came back again. And that was the point at which there was a genuine East-West crisis over Berlin.
The Soviets drive their heavy armor up to Checkpoint Charlie. The Americans waste no time in responding.
They said, go back to the wall, the Russian tanks are coming.
American tanks speed to the checkpoint.
When we got there, I was the lead tank, so of course I was the closest to the Russian tanks, and that was 250 meters. That's just even too close to sight your gun.
This was the famous meeting of the tanks at Checkpoint Charlie, which took place in October 1961. And again, President Kennedy was on the phone talking to the commanders on the ground. And I suppose Khrushchev was also. These were tanks which were armed and ready to shoot. And it easily could have escalated into a battle, easily.
Harold Smith spends 12 hours in the front rank of this standoff between East and West.
We did not have orders to shoot. They didn't move forward. I don't know what the orders would have been if they had started moving forward toward the wall. But I understand that they had orders to shoot us if we tried to come through that wall. It was very, very tense. Who's going to accidentally fire a round? That was my greatest fear, was someone was going to accidentally fire. And I'm afraid that would have been the start of the Third World War.
They're head-to-head for 16 hours.
The whole thing was sorted out quietly in the background, of course. Neither Khrushchev nor Kennedy wanted a war over this one still. It was basically Ulbricht playing games. He was the weak man who is strong because everybody needs him to survive. And Khrushchev, in the end, overruled him, basically. He said to Ulbricht, okay, stop playing these games. They found a way of both sides saving face. The tanks pulled back. And Betty, at that point, October the 28th, 29th, 1961, the Berlin crisis was pretty much over.
But the wall still separates thousands of people, like Klaus Köppen and his fiancée Roswitha. Klaus has an idea how he can bring her out.
We talked about it, and she finally agreed to come across without her parents. So we thought about how we could do it, and we got the idea of converting a VW Beetle.
With his West German passport, Klaus has the right to drive into East Berlin. If the gas tank is removed, there's just enough room for one person.
Because I was petite, he thought I could curl up and squeeze beneath the hood where the gas tank was.
A tiny 1-gallon gas tank will fit on top of her.
I was like an embryo in the womb. It was tight in there, but I didn't really mind. I was athletic and petite.
February 10th, the road to freedom.
Of course, it was very uncomfortable, but it would only be 15 minutes drive and then 10 more at the border. And if she managed that, we'd be all right.
As long as no one looks too hard at the car.
They hadn't reached the point on the border where they thoroughly examined each vehicle. Later on, they looked underneath with their mirrors. They'd shove a flexible rod into the gas tanks to see how deep the tank was and if there was really gas in there. But at that time, they weren't so advanced.
After a few hundred meters, I suddenly noticed that my neck was beginning to burn. The gas pipe had worked itself loose, probably because of the way I was lying. And the gas was pouring over my neck and my back, and it hurt terribly. And I just yelled, "Let me out! Let me out!" Then I really panicked. And then we went back home.
The next weekend, Klaus is ready to try again.
I didn't want to get in there again. I was scared. I'm a bit superstitious like that. If it doesn't work the first time, you shouldn't try to force it. I'd had enough.
The barriers continue to rise. Now people can't even see each other. The desperation to escape increases. A British news team, alerted in advance, is there to film a precisely timed escape through a cemetery behind the wall.
5 men were on board with an elaborate device of 2 ladders hinged together. Spot on the second, the escaper arrives, Stanislaus Gefrera, a 25-year-old mathematician. Ingrid Paulisch of Munich is Stanislaus's fiancée and the reason for his escape.
Anyone who fled from East Germany risked everything. He'd given up his home, his friends. He was risking his life. Anyone that desperate is living in a society that isn't worth living in.
Hundreds are arrested. August 17th, 1962. 18-year-old Peter Fechter is shot trying to escape. He begs for help for nearly an hour. The Eastern Guards do nothing as he bleeds to death.
Whenever people were killed for trying to cross the wall, it was a propaganda defeat for the East German government.
In the first 12 months of the barrier, more than 20 escapers are killed at the wall. Today, these memorials remember more than 130 people killed trying to cross the wall in Berlin. Shot, drowned, or falling from buildings.
The border guards always had orders to shoot at escapers. But in September 1961, after the wall went up, Erich Honecker actually said, "The wall, the frontier, must be so designed that there is a clear field of fire, so that we can annihilate those who violate our borders."
Buildings close to the wall are demolished to make it easier to spot escapers. Not only in Berlin, the whole border between the two German states is now massively reinforced to make it as impenetrable as the wall in Berlin. A death zone is constructed, tearing the two German nations apart. This village, split in the middle, is called Modlerreuth. The locals know it as Little Berlin. An intimidating death zone tears the two Germanys apart. This 559-mile border, plus the wall around Berlin, were known as the Anti-Fascist Protection Barrier. It required an enormous force of 30,000 border guards. They have special training and a strict indoctrination program.
Our primary task is to nip provocations and incidents in the bud, all in the service of peace. So in the end, this is a deeply humane task, which anyone can reconcile with their conscience.
It's also a tedious task, but the guards on both sides get used to it. It's called binocular warfare. And every day, the border gets tighter. March 1962. Brothers Horst and Karl Müller, 24 and 21 years old, are desperate to join their older brother Rudolf in West Berlin. With their wives and children in tow, they have an ingenious plan. They hope to flag down a subway train that travels back and forth between two parts of West Berlin. It has to pass under East Berlin on the way, but it's not so simple. The only approach is through a subway shaft. They fashion a homemade key that lets them in.
It was terrible. The shaft was incredibly steep, and we didn't know what to expect down there. Horst was the first one down. He had to see what was happening.
I had to check it out, and if I came across a policeman, I had to get him out of the way.
The shaft is deserted.
And then we sent the women and children down.
They made such a row on the ladder, the iron clanged. You wouldn't believe it. So I just said, "Kids, you can make as much noise as you like. I mean, if they haven't heard us by now, they're either deaf or completely stupid."
But the tunnel, too, is deserted. Their luck holds. A train is approaching, going in the direction of West Berlin.
He jumped down onto the track and started waving with his torch. The train started to slow down. And we said, "Hey, get off the rails, it's dangerous, the train's coming." And he said, "Bullshit," or something like that.
And it got slower and slower, and it stopped. Imagine that. And it was like every care I had faded away. Now we could get onto the train. We just jumped in. There were already plenty of people in the wagons, and they knew exactly what was happening. 11 people, including kids, were getting out.
It happened so quickly. The West Berliners dragged us in and they sat us down. Not together, one here, one there, all in separate places.
But they are still under East Berlin.
Terrible, terrible. Those were the worst minutes of my life. We didn't know what was going to happen. There were still 5 stations to go before we got to the west. And the train went so slowly through the stations. And we saw the police on the platforms. Terrible. Hoping they wouldn't notice anything, that they wouldn't stop the train. And then we got through, and out the other side, and then all hell broke loose.
It was crazy.
Well, folks, we made it.
Everyone in the train jumped up and hugged us, and we all cheered, and that was great.
We were so happy. You can't imagine how happy we were. You can't describe the feeling. It was simply freedom and happiness that the children were all right and our wives were all right.
The first thing they do is visit their brother Rudolf, who had moved to West Berlin in 1960.
And then the bell rings in my apartment and my brothers are standing in the doorway.
First he stared and stared, and then he was smiling all over his face.
I was completely confused. I thought, no, this can't be true. And is my wife there? And I just stared.
We couldn't take his wife with us. She was being watched all the time. The house was under observation every day. They just stood there and watched it.
When the wall went up, Rudolf had already escaped to West Berlin. His wife Traudl and his 2 young sons were to follow. But with every passing month, hopes of a reunion faded. Since then, Rudolf has been looking for a way to bring them over, without success.
It isn't easy to shock Rudy, but he was knocked flat. He couldn't say a word. He just burst into tears. And then we made him a solemn promise that we were going to start planning right away to bring his wife and children over.
It won't be straightforward. The East German state is busy countering escape attempts in Berlin and along the German-German border with more obstacles. And there are also incentives for the guards.
The Central Committee member responsible for security matters in the 1960s was Erich Honecker. He was always instantly informed of successful or unsuccessful escape attempts. For instance, when someone was shot dead, Honecker signed the documents, the Stasi report. He signed the documents rewarding or praising the guards.
But this is no normal national frontier. The guards on the western side are Germans too. And East German border police are trained to shoot at people from their own side.
it was a real problem for the East German government. So the indoctrination was heavy, discipline was tough. When you think of the young men in those guard towers who would be required, if necessary, to shoot somebody who's trying to escape, you've got to understand. I mean, these are people who spoke the same language, who grew up in the same towns, who shared a background. How can I be expected to, you know, fire a gun against my cousin Gunther?
In West Berlin, Mayor Willy Brandt can only offer pious words.
We want a situation in which there is no more shooting.
Right in the middle of East Berlin, there's an East German soldier who doesn't want any shooting either. In fact, Wolfgang Engels wants to escape, and he has a plan: to drive an armored personnel carrier through the wall.
I got into contact with the soldiers, and it all started with a chat about cars. They were interested in my car, and I was interested in their armored personnel carrier. They loved showing it off to me, inside too. And by talking shop, I learned how to start the engine and how the gears worked. Everything I needed to get it moving.
He wasn't intense about it. He just seemed to be asking questions by chance. How does that work? Show me that. Not in a way that made us think he wanted to drive it. We couldn't see that. He was very relaxed about it all.
The soldiers and their officers went to dinner, and I stayed behind. I said I had things to do. And once they'd gone, I got in, turned on the engine, and got going.
April 17th, 5 p.m.
I drove straight through the gate. It was only closed with a chain, and turned off towards Treptow. I had to drive along Stalin Alley, and I came up to the only traffic lights. In those days, they were controlled by a policeman in a little hut. The armed forces of the state have priority on the roads.
20 kilometers to freedom. He's now being followed. The die is cast.
You can't just drive up to the wall, put on the handbrake and say, it was just an exercise. There was no going back now. The doors were still in East Berlin, on that side of the wall. My first reaction was to get out, and I found myself standing in the middle of the rolls of barbed wire. You could say you were pretty excited in a situation like that. Adrenaline levels up to here, and then some. I didn't even feel the bullet hit me. I was so hyped.
So vollgepumpt ist man.
He's badly injured. West Berliners hurry to his aid.
They carried me into a bar, and looking up from the floor, I saw labels on the bottles I only knew from commercials. That's how I knew I was in the West.
And now he's on the blacklist of the East. Theft, desertion, and damaging state property. Wolfgang Engels has a bullet in his back. His legs and arms have been shredded by barbed wire, but he's happy, except for one thing. His mother, a committed communist in the East, rejects him as a traitor. The builders of the Berlin Wall react to every escape attempt with an escalation of their defenses. In the coming years, they will replace the thin concrete sections with L-shaped concrete and steel slabs, each one 12 feet high and weighing 3 tons. A vehicle ramming the wall drives onto the base of the slab, and its own weight keeps the wall standing. The wall has now become a player in the Cold War.
It was actually a factor in stabilizing the situation in Central Europe during the early 60s and allowing the fear of war, which had existed over Germany basically since 1945, when it had been divided between East and West, to dissipate gradually.
In June 1963, John F. Kennedy finally visits West Berlin.
The attention was away from Berlin. Kennedy brings it back to Berlin with his famous speech, his famous visit, which generates enormous popular support in Berlin.
As a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Berliner.
I think in terms of the history of Berlin and the wall, Kennedy's visit is very big, very important, symbolic. And it does tell people in West Berlin that the United States will support it, will support them.
He will later say, seeing that wall with his own eyes showed him its real brutality. That brutality is cruelly demonstrated months before in the middle of Berlin. In May 1962, Rudolf Müller and his 2 younger brothers finally devise a way to reunite Rudolf with his family. The construction of the wall separated him from his 2 children, Bernd and Christian, now 8 and 5 years old, and from his wife, Traudl.
They arrested my wife once because she waved. They interrogated her. They kept her locked up for a whole day with the children, and they made it clear to her, your husband is over there. We know about him. We know what kind of man he is. You're never going to see him again. You aren't getting across. We'll see to that.
The 3 Müller brothers, along with friends, start to dig a tunnel. They will be breaking into the east. The tunnel will go just 25 yards from a shed in the west under the wall.
At first, we hardly got anywhere. The ground was like concrete. But suddenly it got easier. Then we had the problem of getting the sand out of the tunnel, and that got more difficult as it got longer and the air got worse and worse.
4 men per shift, 4 6-hour shifts a day. They start digging from a building site, tunneling just 8 feet below the border guards, so they have to work quietly.
I could have scraped all my skin off and not noticed. I had a goal, really. Every moment I dug, I could see my family. Just keep looking forward. We'll do it. We've got to.
Suddenly, they come to an area where the earth is very soft.
I looked up because there was such a strange creaking noise, and then a load came down. All they could see were my legs and my shoes. And they could see where they had to scrape away the sand. That was terrible. I'd already been through a hell of a lot, but I didn't want to get trapped under the sand. That was terrible. I still can't talk about that. It was bad.
On June 18th, after 3 weeks of digging, the brothers reached their goal.
Rudy said, "Hottie, go on, make a hole. We've got to get through." Then I sort of rammed my way up and it finally gave way. There was a wardrobe over the hole. When I broke through, it shifted with a hell of a noise, but we'd made it.
Rudolf is offered a gun.
Take this with you. They're so nervous and trigger-happy. You've got to be able to defend yourself, or they'll lock you up and throw away the key. I took the thing and stuck it in my belt. A guard was standing there. I went up to him and made a sign, greeted him. He just looked at me, didn't greet me back. I thought, oh God.
Rudolf's family is waiting round the corner.
I could sense him looking at me. I could feel it on the back of my neck. My hair was literally standing up on end.
And the guard must already have been suspicious. He'd been watching. And then Rudy came back after a while with his family.
I said to Trauchen, now you go around the corner, along the wall, and keep going, whatever happens. And just as I was saying that, the guard came around again. I stopped. The others carried on a bit. Don't get funny. You saw me just now. We're going to a birthday party. You know, the way we talk in Berlin, nice and relaxed. But he wasn't listening. He was nervous. I could see it in his face. Somehow he was nervous. He just said, the women and children stop there. And he raised his machine gun, and I just thought, now that's it. He's going to shoot.
He would have fired, 100% sure. He would have killed them all.
I took out the gun, aimed at the machine pistol, and pulled the trigger.
It all happened at the same time. Rudy fired at the guard in self-defense, and a policeman in a watchtower started shooting too.
And then suddenly the guard fell over.
I panicked. I just yelled, run, run, run!
The family ran, the children and the women, and the policeman in the tower was firing at the children.
I could see the bullets kicking up the dust.
And then we got into the hole. Thank God we all got in. I was the last one. And then the guards came running up. They seemed to be there in seconds, and right away they started firing into the cellar, right into the tunnel.
The escapers are lucky. The shape of the tunnel protects them from the bullets. But the guard is dead.
At that moment, there was nothing to be happy about. I was really down.
In East Germany, Reinhold Huhn is turned into a martyr.
The young border guard was 21 when he fell victim to the murderer's bullets.
I have this permanent feeling of guilt. A man died as a result of our escape. That person was killed by the shot I fired. That's terrible. No court can take that away from me. They could find me guilty or innocent 3 times over. I carry that guilt and I can never be free of it as long as I live.
The wall made Rudolf Müller both a criminal and a victim. By 1964, more than 70 tunnels have been dug from west to east and from east to west, freeing more than 250 people. But the East German secret police, the Stasi, find a way to stop them. They infiltrate escape groups even before they start digging. In the 1960s, both sides learn they have to live with the wall for good or ill.
The people of West Berlin, for the first time in years, are able to cross the wall.
Christmas time, the first tiny unfreezing of relations. And with it, the wall is turning into a success for the East German regime.
The wall has often been called the second birth of the GDR. It gave the state an opportunity to stabilize itself and to see what it could do for the people. In other words, what kind of life could it give people once it was guaranteed a captive audience and once its labor force couldn't leave. So in effect, it saved the GDR, the wall, from almost certain collapse.
In 1961, East Germany sealed its own borders with barbed wire and concrete to save itself from economic collapse. For 10 years, they reinforced this frontier against ever more daring escapers. In May 1971, a new dictator comes to power in East Germany, Erich Honecker. While he gives the appearance of being more modern, the wall is still the public symbol of his absolute state control. 560 miles of border fencing between the two Germanys, with over 1,000 watchtowers and 50,000 guards. 60,000 automatic guns connected to tripwires. Minefields laid with dinner plate-sized Type 66 anti-personnel mines. For any East German who still wants to escape, it seems impossible. And the Cold War is heating up. In the 1970s, the Soviet Union stations nuclear missiles in East Germany. The Americans plan to do the same in West Germany.
Very few politicians in West Germany ever thought Germany would be reunited, at least in anybody's lifetime.
In East Germany, Honecker benefits from the superpower rivalry, and things have been getting better in the GDR. It has become the shop window of the socialist world, apparently proof that communism works.
Fridges, washing machines, TV sets. The beginnings of a modest prosperity, in other words, started to occur in the mid-60s with the population stabilized, the educated parts of the population no longer going off to West Germany. You had a situation where people could feel life was not too bad.
The regime can feel secure too. They and their state are very well protected. Every young man has to serve in the People's Army. They face the enemy in the West and their own people who want to cross the border. Ingo Bethke is a border guard.
Basically, anyone who tries to cross the frontier is breaking the law. He is a criminal. He has to be resisted with every possible means. Of course, no one actually said we must shoot to kill, but if we did, they certainly approved.
Ingo Bethke is himself a criminal because he wants to escape from East Germany. May 26, 1975. He will escape at night with a friend. Ingo has served here. He knows this section of the border perfectly.
Of course, they would have fired, but you have to aim too. A Kalashnikov isn't accurate, but it has 30 rounds. You get through that in a couple of seconds.
Bethke knows the terrain. After the border area comes the frontier fence with its death strip, and then the Elbe River with its patrol boats. It's a formidable barrier.
It was a sense of adventure. I wanted to see the country the Beatles came from. There must be something on the other side of the wall, but it was off limits. We just wanted to be able to go wherever we liked.
He knows the guards could come back at any time. Now comes the next obstacle, the minefield.
The only time I really got scared was in the minefield. I'd heard that if you stepped on a mine, part of your foot was blown off, maybe up to the ankle, but not the whole leg. We had a small paddle. If we slap that down and a mine explodes, we should be okay, but then we'll have to hurry. That was the only time I sweated a bit. Apart from that, it was nice and dark. Nobody saw us.
Next task, blowing up their airbeds on the banks of the Elbe River.
The Elbe has a very fast current. Swimmers quickly get carried away. There are eddies and everybody's scared of them. I didn't want to drown, so bringing the airbeds was a good idea.
They paddled for half an hour.
At first, we thought the other bank would never get any closer. It was dark. We paddled like madmen, and suddenly we'd made it. And there was a customs bus right in front of us. We said, "Hello?" And they said, "Where have you come from? Isn't it a bit cold for swimming?" And we said, "Yes, it is really, but we've just escaped from the GDR." They took us back to their guardhouse and gave us something hot to drink and eat, and we were lucky because it all worked out.
Most escapers are arrested and imprisoned, some killed. Ingo Bethke is one of the few who make it across the Elbe. The Bethke family. Ingo has left 2 brothers behind. He will try to get them out too. For a guard unit, a successful escape is a humiliation. Every case is investigated, and the system is constantly reinforced. By now, these are the obstacles to getting over the wall. The watchtower, the rear wall, the bed of nails, electrified barbed wire fence, dogs, alarm wires, and there's a trap for the guards too.
The brushed sand, for instance, would show footprints. So in other words, if you're up in your guard tower and you see somebody trying to cross and you choose at that point to look away and hope that nobody notices and the person gets through safely to the, to the western side, that will not be the case, because when somebody's escaped, obviously there'll be a huge inquiry and they will see the footprints in the sand next to your guard tower and they will know exactly what went on, and you will be in deep, deep trouble.
The East German state is strong. Erich Honecker has forced his people to respect him. Now he wants the world to recognize his state.
On the one hand, they were seeking respectability. They wanted to be seen as a state that functioned, that was on an equal basis with all other states. But at the same time, they didn't actually want to allow their own citizens the freedoms that membership of the international community allowed.
Détente is the magic word. In the 1970s, there's a series of important international agreements.
All's well that ends well.
At last, the regime has won full recognition throughout the world, in exchange for signing away a little more freedom to its citizens.
Technically, they were now allowed freedom of movement, freedom to choose where they worked, freedom of expression. The communist governments would frequently sign these manifestos and international agreements and simply not allow them to be carried out on their own soil.
Instead, they build the wall even higher. In East Berlin, communist leader Erich Honecker is completing the next stage of the wall. Bigger, broader, and more terrifying. Because 1,000 people a year are still escaping. This wall is built to be permanent, intimidating, and deadly. L-shaped concrete slabs weighing 3 tons, topped off with a concrete cylinder that's impossible to grip. Most people have given up thoughts of escape, but not all.
I couldn't travel where I liked. I couldn't say what I liked. If you told a political joke, you had to expect to go to prison. It was that simple.
Peter Strelzik lives in Thüringen, 30 miles from the border. He's an engineer and an inventor. He knows at ground level the wall is impenetrable, but he comes up with an ingenious and daring solution, a balloon that will carry his family over the border.
A gas balloon would be better, because you wouldn't see the flame. But where do you get hydrogen, helium? There's nothing else for it. Hot air.
They will have to travel 20 miles from Lobenstein in East Germany to just over the border. July 3rd.
We were ready for takeoff. The burner had heated up the air. I started to feel a bit queasy.
I gave it a good blast on the burner, and we slowly rose over the trees. I wanted to get as high as possible, because I was afraid they might shoot. They might shoot at us.
Then, at about 4,000 feet, the balloon flew into a cloud, and the canopy started absorbing water, and we began to sink fast.
They crash land in some woods. But where?
We didn't know. Are we in West Germany or are we still in the East?
Then they come to some depressing signs.
I'll never forget this. There was a box on a tree stump with lots of wires round it. I wondered if it was some kind of alarm, or maybe an automatic machine gun.
It's a sure sign that they're still on the East German side of the border.
And then we just burst into tears. We were so near, just 200 yards to go, but we're still here. Nothing has changed.
They leave the balloon, and it's discovered by an off-duty East German policeman.
I'd gone looking for mushrooms, and I saw the balloon hanging there. But I didn't say anything, because they would have pulled me in, and they would have told me off. What were you doing there? You have no business to be there. They wouldn't have praised me. They would have kicked me in the arse.
17 days later, the Stasi finds the balloon. Local cop Egon Matjasek, this time on duty, is called in to guard the site.
I was detailed to seal off the crime scene. I had a really good look at the balloon.
I left my photo album behind, but I went back to fetch it. And then in the rush, I forgot my medicines.
I saw the Stasi writing down the numbers, so maybe they could trace the perpetrators that way. If I'd reported it earlier, they would have started the search much sooner. About 2 weeks had gone by.
The Stasi appeal for information in a newspaper. Stasi's secret police headquarters in Berlin. Information floods in here, but it never comes out. Escape attempts are bad news. Thousands of people are working here to stop them.
So we nip these things in the bud. We do not want more people being shot crossing the wall. We got them never to get to the wall in the first place. So the huge expansion of the Stasi to become possibly the most numerous per head of population, and in many ways, in a ghastly way, successful secret police force in history.
They file secret reports on every escape attempt, every anti-government statement, every tiny detail. Meanwhile, the Stasi are following the trail of evidence. Fabric from the balloon, medicines, a wrench. It's only a matter of time before the trail leads to the Strelzigs.
Whenever a car drove by outside, I hope it's not the police. Oh yes, that was a scary time.
But they're determined to build a new balloon as fast as they can. And another family, the Wetzels, are coming along. Now there will be 4 adults and 4 children.
It's got to be bigger. There are 4 more of us now. We've got to buy the fabric. The whole thing has to start all over again.
We couldn't buy it all in one go. They would have found us out for sure. So we bought the fabric in small amounts in all sorts of different shops.
We needed 10,000 square feet. That's enough for a small circus tent.
He started sewing again up in our bedroom, day and night. He even sewed in his sleep.
They sew every spare minute for 6 weeks. September 16th, 1979.
We said, the wind is so perfect. If it's ever going to work, it'll be tonight.
A hidden clearing in the forest will be the takeoff point.
There was dead silence, not a sound, nothing. All you could hear was the burner when they fired off some gas. But apart from that, there was no sound, absolute silence.
Shortly after takeoff, they were spotted by the guards at the control point.
Suddenly we noticed that in the direction we were making for, we could see searchlights.
They had the perfect opportunity to shoot it down. And one of the guards at the control point wanted to get the order to shoot. And he called Berlin. And they gave him the order. But by then, the balloon had gone.
And then it began to stutter and pop, and the gas was finished. The flame went out, and then we could see up into the canopy. And there was a long gash at the top, right in the middle.
I'd made one mistake. I'd fired the burner full blast and burned a hole in the canopy 80 feet above. And that was damn dangerous.
From that moment, we just went down. We couldn't heat the air anymore. Luckily, the balloon was a bit bigger than it needed to be, and so it worked a bit like a parachute. And that slowed us down.
I just hoped that they wouldn't drag us out half dead. I made peace with myself. You can't imagine how calm you can be at moments like that.
I take a look around with a torch, and I see the tops of the fir trees rushing towards us. And then I hear a cracking sound.
The first time it took us 34 minutes, and the second time it was just 28 minutes. And because of that, I thought we hadn't made it this time either.
We just stepped out onto the road and stopped a car. And who got out but two policemen? The first question we asked was, are we in the West?
And he said, where else would you be? Because they were pretty surprised too.
And so then we knew we'd done it. So, of course, we all ran around like crazy, hugging and kissing. One big celebration.
All the Stasi can do is put everything into the files and reconstruct the crime. The Strelzik family's escape makes headlines around the world.
Freedom is, I believe, the most valuable thing a human being can possess. But the only people who know that are people who've had to live without it. If you've grown up free, you don't know what it means. You take it for granted.
West Berlin, freedom and department stores overflowing with goods. The dream of the West at the start of the 1980s. By comparison, the East is gray.
The GDR could never stabilize the situation so that the people were happy, with no shortages and a little bit of liberalization, because the West was always breathing down its neck as an unwelcome comparison.
Temptation lies just over the wall. Meanwhile, East Germany celebrates its 30th anniversary. The East offers parades, ceremony, and familiarity.
Most of them didn't want to risk their lives just to get over to the West. Most of them thought, well, life might be better over there, but I live here. There might be problems with our life, but maybe we'll improve at living here. There was not, as is often thought in the West, a great climate of hatred and feeling of oppression. There was not this feeling of being imprisoned in a society.
But there was one thing they hated.
Most people were very, very aware that Germans in the West had become great travelers. And they really felt very bad that the best they could hope for was maybe a week in Lake Balaton in Hungary, or perhaps a trip to Prague.
Building and guarding the wall takes a big chunk out of Germany's gross national product. A fortune that Honecker no longer possesses by the 1980s. And the frontier is never finished.
The wall was a big imposition on a country which often struggled financially. It may have cost as much as $1 billion a year to maintain over the 28 years that followed.
$1 billion Deutschmarks, $500 million a year, and it still can't stop people escaping. People with crazy ideas, like Holger Bethke. The Bethke family. Eldest brother Ingo swam across the river to freedom. 8 years later, his youngest brother Holger wants to join him in the West.
We put on maintenance men's kit and wore overalls. We attached a meter rule to the bow so it looked like a measuring rod. And we wound the steel cable round a big drum as though we had come to work in this building. If anyone saw us on the staircase on the way up to the attic, we could say, "We're working here."
The date is March 31st. Holger will shoot, while his brother Ingo waits in the west to retrieve the arrow in the line.
I just heard a ping and thought, oh damn, it's landed in a tree. And when they tugged at it, I saw something moving. I looked closer at the tree and I saw it. Man, oh man, I've got it. And then the two of them were over the moon. I got hold of it and I began to pull.
The steel cable is attached to the nylon cord and pulled over.
The idea was to tie it to the car and stretch it tight, because then we'd have more pulling power.
The homemade pulley is attached.
I don't know if I looked down. I must have been so wound up. I think I only looked forwards. You've got to make it. You've got to make it. I hope no one shoots. I hope no one notices. About 3 yards short of the building in West Berlin, I stopped. It wouldn't go any further. There was a short gap left.
Hanging in no man's land without a safety net.
The border strip was incredibly brightly lit. They had arc lights every 10 to 15 meters, pointing downwards. So if you looked up from a watchtower, you saw a glaring white light, and beyond that you probably couldn't see anything at all. Of course, we hoped those bright border lights would help a bit, because we were above them, so they wouldn't see us right away. And then I saw my pal come rolling after me. We'd finally done it. We were in the West.
They found a blind spot between two towers. Then the East Germans built a new tower to make sure it couldn't happen here again.
So you could say that later my brother got his own watchtower.
The Wall. For a few artists, this is the biggest canvas on Earth, the East Side Gallery. Seen from the west, it's as loud as West Berlin. A tourist attraction separating two worlds. West and East. Erich Honecker still makes great claims for his republic.
Everyone has his place in the German Democratic Republic, regardless of his political views and his religion.
The prisons are full of critics who think differently from the regime. What's a state to do when it has too many dissidents and is bankrupt?
You work out a deal with the West Germans whereby you sell them dissidents. In other words, you stick these people in jail and then you do a deal and say, we'll let you have these people in exchange for Westmarks, the precious Westmark.
West Germany buys people's freedom for up to $50,000 each. Selling 35,000 dissidents actually helps East Germany avert bankruptcy. And there are huge loans from the West. But with one condition. The booby-trapped guns on the border have to go. It's not a problem for Honecker. He's not thinking of the past. he's thinking of the future.
And in fact, by the 1980s, they were planning a high-tech war, which in essence would be the computer technology by this point, and was such that they could envisage making a high-tech war where relatively little human intervention would be involved, and people wouldn't even be able to get near it without being picked up by the various sensors and cameras.
This was Erich Honecker's Wall 2000. Infrared, laser, and vibration detectors would trigger alarms when they sense an escaper. Automatic cameras and searchlights home in, and chemical sprays disable them. Flanked by green bushes, the dangerous reality would be camouflaged to look benign and bucolic. 1985. In the Kremlin, a new communist dictator, Mikhail Gorbachev, begins talking peace. American President Ronald Reagan is determined to regain the initiative. He comes to Berlin in July 1987.
Just this picture, which has been reproduced millions of times of him standing there in front of the Brandenburg Gate, was as dramatic an effect as you could have. And so we more than achieved our goals with the speech.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Reagan was the first president in a long time who didn't see the Cold War continuing forever. He had at least a hope that it would be temporary, that the Cold War would end, the Soviet Union would end, and the Cold War would be over and the US would win it.
In this thaw between East and West, Honecker visits his counterpart in West Germany, Helmut Kohl, the ultimate recognition for the little brother.
We respect the existing frontiers, but we want to overcome this division on a path of peaceful understanding and freedom.
Perhaps just words?
Erich Honecker tried so long to keep a tight hand on things because he knew that he couldn't afford to just relax slightly, because as soon as he relaxed, East Germany would go. It would just melt away.
The Bethke family is at it again. The last of the three brothers is still in the East, Egbert. In 1989, escape kings Ingo and Holger want to fly back over the wall to get Egbert out using 2 planes in just 30 minutes.
First, we bought one microlight and taught each other to fly. We got into all kinds of scrapes. We must have bust 3 propellers and sent a few engines to the junkyard, and we broke a wing too. You know, learning by doing.
Even if they carried on building the wall and made it even higher, there would always be people who wanted to cross.
One plane will land in Treptow Park in East Berlin and pick up their brother Egbert, while the other patrols in the sky above. Their brother approves.
I thought the idea was fantastic. Fly over the wall, land, and fly back. Seemed like a pretty good idea. I liked it.
They've thought it all through.
We stuck red stars under the wings and another one at the back. We hoped that would give us the advantage of surprise over the border guards.
They know the border guards are not allowed to shoot at air targets without permission.
So we thought, a border guard sees us at 4 a.m. He calls his company commander and drags him out of bed. And he calls the battalion commander. And he calls the Russians. And it takes forever.
Until someone calls back, and by that time we're long gone.
May 26, 1989, a West Berlin sports field.
We drove the truck to the field, and at midnight we started unloading the planes. We'd put them together and dismantled them so often that we were pretty good at it.
4:22 a.m. They switched on the cameras attached to their planes and filmed the entire flight.
We were nervous, but as soon as we took off, it all fell away. It was stressful, though. I had to raise my visor because I couldn't see a thing. It was so dark.
They switch on their radio to try to contact Egbert.
Once we'd taken off, we started asking over the air, "Are you there?"
I had to watch out. I was in a bush near the path, and I couldn't see out because of all the leaves. Everything was covered. And if someone had come past by chance walking their dog and heard a voice in the bush and called the police, so I had to speak very quietly. Ingo, can you hear me?
And suddenly I heard his crackly voice. Yes, I'm here, and we knew, thank God, he's there.
Okay, copy, we're on the way. Yep, I'm okay too.
Then they knew I was here, and I knew they were coming, but I didn't hear a thing from them until they were airborne.
Of course we're on the way. I can see the wall in front of me. Over. Okay, I'll wait.
The rendezvous is in East Berlin's Treptow Park. Then they see something big on their runway.
We were surprised to see that there was a travelling circus in the park. It must have been set up at the weekend. The field was just about big enough to land in, with this little Russian travelling circus standing there.
Ingo, I think I can see you. When should I come out?
I landed somewhere at the end of the field. Egbert jumped out of the bush and I yelled, "Careful, don't walk into the propeller," because of course he was even more excited than I was.
I ran round the propeller, sat down in the seat and shouted, "Go, Ingo, go!" I was really excited.
I said, cool it, we don't want you falling out.
I said, "Come on, take off, go, go," because I was still scared that a cop car would come by. And they drive straight off the road into the park.
And then I hit the gas and we took off again.
The trees were coming closer and closer because we were twice as heavy, and I weighed 80 kilos then.
I completed one circuit and they were down there in front of me, taking off.
As we took off, I had to think about my friends, my parents, and I was a bit sad then. I was incredibly happy when we were a few feet above the ground, flying to freedom, but there was a sadness too, because at that time you had to assume that you'd never see them again.
3 brothers reunited in the sky over Berlin.
I thought, now we've done it. Nothing can go wrong. Egg is on board.
I wasn't scared we'd crash or someone would shoot at us. We saw the border guards beneath us and we saw them looking up.
They were looking up at us as they were making their report. What could they do? We were Russians.
And then we were on the way to the Reichstag. Ingo and Holger had to find a place to land.
We made a perfect landing.
We're here! We made it!
I was so happy and excited, I literally went down on my knees and kissed the ground and said, "Thank God it worked, we've made it." Fantastic. I was just happy.
October 7th, East Germany's 40th birthday. As far as Communist General Secretary Erich Honecker is concerned, the country will go on forever. But Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev has different thoughts of reforms.
The marchers were shouting out, "Gorby, save us." And that really was the point at which I think the pressure cooker inside East Germany met the reform movement within the Communist Party, and that decisive point arrived where suddenly it was really clear that the Russian bayonets were not going to save Honecker.
We assure our friends all around the world that socialism on German soil, in the land of Marx and Engels, rests on indestructible foundations.
Honecker was deeply resistant to change, not at all interested in compromising, and he felt that the regime was solid. he lived increasingly in a world of fantasy.
Because elsewhere in Eastern Europe, in Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary, borders are opening. The electrified fence between Hungary and Austria is dismantled. Suddenly, East German vacationers have a safe way out.
All on the trees were nails, and they'd hung their keys on them, car keys, house keys. So they'd left behind. I mean, I live in a house with all kinds of stuff. I can't imagine walking away and leaving it all. That's what they did. That's how badly they wanted to go.
CBS News correspondent Alan Pitsey at the West German Embassy in Prague, where hundreds, then thousands of East Germans have taken refuge. Finally, they're told that West Germany has agreed to take them in.
I've done it. I can only say I'm a free man.
Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev refuses to act to protect East Germany. His advice?
I believe that dangers lie in wait only for those who fail to react to life.
And nothing would ever have happened in East Germany, nothing would have ever happened in most of Eastern Europe if it hadn't been for the arrival of one man, and that was Gorbachev. This was the first man who said, we are not going to send in the tanks.
But Honecker's regime is not giving in.
We're demonstrating peacefully. We don't want anything bad.
It was the biggest gathering I think they'd ever had. And when you saw that, you realized, wow, if they're out here, they cannot stop this. They can't stop people speaking. They can't stop them gathering. And people are not afraid to gather. It's over. The authorities have lost total control. Genie's out of the bottle, the toothpaste is out of the tube, whatever you want to call it.
East German Politburo spokesman Günter Schabowski announces on November 9, 1989, that for the first time, East German citizens can travel abroad freely. A journalist asks him when. He answers, at once. It was a mistake. He should have said, tomorrow. The news spreads like wildfire. 3 hours later at the checkpoints, border guards are totally unprepared.
We grabbed all our gear and we raced as fast as we could go to Checkpoint Charlie, and there they were. They were just heaving through. The gates were open, the guards were gone, the people were just pouring through. One gigantic street party, and all these trabbies were coming across. These rotten little Trabants were coming across, and the West Germans were shouting and hollering, and people were hugging. It was a fabulous, fabulous moment.
If anyone had told me I'd see this damn wall come down in my lifetime, I'd have said they were crazy.
But not everyone is happy.
The people over there are talking about reunification. I'm absolutely against that. I'm sure there are lots of good things there, but they have a lot of muck over there too, and I think it should stay there.
East Germany disappeared like a fairy tale, a nasty fairy tale. And I think, to me, that's my chief fascination with the place. It seemed artificial at the time, and now it went like a puff of smoke over a period of just a few days and months.
On October 3rd, 1 year after the wall came down, Germany was reunified. It signified the end of communism. During the 28 years the wall existed, At least 40,000 people escaped across the border to the west. 75,000 more were prosecuted for trying. Over 1,300 died, including at least 136 in Berlin itself. But the East covered up so many deaths so effectively, the exact total is still not known. Today, the Berlin Wall, that symbol of the Iron Curtain, the front line in the Cold War, has nearly disappeared. Remnants can be found in museums around the world. Some pieces ended up as souvenirs. But most of the concrete and steel that formed the wall have been recycled to help rebuild Germany, a once divided country.